all, today I'll be discussing on Introduction to Indian Temple Architecture. Indian temple architecture, even though its evolution has been taken place under various dynasties all over India, the architecture style can be broadly categorized between northern style and southern style of temple architecture. So here, evolution of Indian temple, if we summarize your timeline, it all started from the Gupta period in north and then towards the south in Chalukya, Pallava, Chola, Pandya, Hoysala and Vijayanagara. Now, elements of Hindu temple architecture, as we see in the figure, the main elements can be discussed. That is, first one, Shikara, that is tower or the spire, and it is the pyramidal or tapering portion of the temple which represents the mythological meadow or the highest peak. The shape and size of the tower can vary from region to region. Next is Garbhagriha, which means the womb chamber. It is the nucleus and the innermost chamber of the temple where the image or the idol of the deity is placed. The chamber is mostly of a square plan and is entered by a doorway on its eastern side. Here, the visitors are not allowed inside the Garbhagriha in most of the temples, and only the priests perform the rituals and worship over here. And next is Pradakshina Pada, which means the ambulatory passageway for circumambulation. It consists of an enclosed corridor which is carried around the outside of Garbhagriha, and here the devotees walk around the deity in a clockwise direction as a worship ritual and symbol of respect to the temple god or goddesses. Next is Mandapa, which is a pillared hall in front of Garbhagriha for the assembly of devotees. It is used by the devotees to sit, pray, chant, meditate and watch the priests performing the rituals inside the Garbhagriha. It is also known as Natamandira, which means the temple hall of dancing, where in olden days rituals of music and dance was performed here. In some of the earlier temples, Mandapa was an isolated and separate structure from the sanctuary. But now, Mandapa and the main sanctuary is connected by an intermediate chamber or vestibule, that is Antarala, which unites the main sanctuary and the pillared hall of the temple. Next is Ardha Mandapa, which means the front porch or the entrance of the temple which leads to the Mandapa. Next is Gopurams or Toranas. Gopurams, which we call in North Indian temple, and then Torana in South Indian temple for a temple gateway. Next is Pita, that is plinth or the platform over which the temple rests. And next is Amalaka, that is fluted disc like stone placed at the apex of Shikara. Apart from all these elements that we have discussed here, there are other kind of motifs, sculptures and other decorations inside the temple in ceilings and walls and columns. And the deity is mostly dedicated to the Trimurtis, that is Brahma, Vishnu or Shiva. Here the figure shows the various elements of Hindu temple architecture. And next is the structure of the temple, that is the basic elements which imparts stability to the structure of Indian temple, that is base, wall and supporting elements. First one, base. The base of the Hindu temple consists of series of moldings, as you can see in the figure. These moldings are the horizontal bands corresponding to the courses of masonry supporting the walls and the superstructure of Hindu temple. In Hindu temple architecture, moldings exist not as etchings or modulation to other elements, but as elements with larger elements. These are more similar to the architrave, frieze and cornice in classical pediment than to moldings within these. Next is wall. the zone between the superstructure and the base of the Hindu temple architecture, which consists of walls, pillars, and pilasters. The walls in Hindu temple architecture are constructed as composite stone masonry with an infill of stone and brick with lime and mud. The thickness of the stone can vary from 300 to 4500 mm. That is, average thickness of masonry wall can vary from 800 mm to 1200 mm. Through stones are provided at regular intervals to strengthen the wall. Next is supporting element. That is, Hindu temple consists of tall, slender, freestanding beam supporting columns, pillars, and pilasters. The columns are not the defining elements of Hindu temple architecture as that of Western classical architecture. Okay. Here in the figure, you can see two kinds of wall. That is, walls with cores of masonry in North Indian temple, and next walls with cores of masonry in South Indian temples. Next is the location of the temple, the science behind the location of temple. That is, the idol of the god is set inside the core center of the temple, which is known as Garbhagriha, or the main sanctum, or Mulasthanam, place where the earth's magnetic waves are discovered to be the most extreme. The form of Purusha or human body was made to sit or suit the abstract idea of the square as supreme geometric form. The basic form of Vastu Purusha Mandala is square. That is, mandala is actually a square which is subdivided into smaller squares in the form of a grid, with each square unit clearly marking the areas of respective gods, as you can see in the figure. The most commonly used mandala is square divided into 64, that is 8 by 8, and 81 squares, that is 9 by 9. The smaller squares in the grid are called as one pada. That can vary from numbers 1, 4, 9, 16, 25, and so on. Vastu Purusha Mandala are different names according to the number of pada within the grid. The mandala having 1, 4, 9, 16, 25, and 36 numbers of pada within the grid are known as Sakala Mandala, Pechaga Mandala, Pita Mandala, Mahapita Mandala, Manduka Chatika Mandala, and Paramasaika Mandala respectively. And here, the Vastu Purusha Mandala, having all the geometrical, astronomical, and human properties, was the basis of the ground floor plan of all Hindu temples. The central 4 squares acquire the place of the main deity, and the inner ring of 12 squares form the wall of the Garbhagriha, and next 16 to 28 forms the Pradakshina Pada. These simple divisions of square with many permutations and combinations became the base for the complex structures of other temples. A Hindu temple design follows a geometrical design which is called as Vastu Purusha Mandala, we already discussed. Here 9 by 9, that is 81 grid, that is called Paramasaika layout plan, which is found in large ceremonial Hindu temples. It is one of the many grids used to build Hindu temples. That is the first figure. The design layouts a Hindu temple in a symmetrical, self-repeating structure derived from central belief with cardinality and mathematical principles. Next comes the evolution of architecture styles in temples of Indian architecture. That is, the distinctive architecture styles due to broad geographical, climatic, cultural, racial, historical, and linguistic differences between the northern plains and the southern peninsula of India. And broadly, the Indian architecture for temple can be broadly categorized based on the geography, that is into three different orders, that is Nagara style, which is North Indian style, and then Dravidian or South Indian style, and then Vyasa or hybrid style, which is a combination of the both Nagara and Dravidian, that is found in Deccan region. So first one is Nagara style. Here the plan is basically a square with a number of gradual projections in the middle of each side, which imparts it a cruciform shape, as you can see in the plan. These projections can occur throughout the height of the structure. In elevation, it exhibits a tower or shikara, which is gradually inclining towards in a convex curve. The projections in the plan, as we see here, are also carried upwards to the top of the shikara and is called as Rekha Shikara. Here in Nagara style of architecture, the sanctuary as a whole is known as Vimana, that consists of two parts. That is, upper part of Vimana is called as Shikara, and the lower part inside the Vimana is called Garbhagriha, the cell or the inner chamber. Then comes the Mandapa, which is the pillared hall in front of Garbhagriha for the assembly of the devotees. Shikara, Garbhagriha and Mandapa is same thing as we discussed in the general elements of the Hindu temple architecture. Then Amalaka Kalasha, which is on top of Amalaka, a spherical shape was placed, usually in North Indian temple. And then Antarala, which we have already discussed in the elements of Hindu temple architecture. And here the plinth is called as Jagati, which is a raised platform for sitting and praying, and is common in North Indian temple. Then in Nagara style, these temples consisted of all the basic elements: the Garbhagriha surrounded by an ambulatory path, an outer portico with columns in front and a flat roof of stone. And some of the examples from this period are the temples at Sanchi, Tikava and Dioka, Linkaraja, Kantariya Mahadeva, Sun Temple at Konark. Originally in Nagara style, there were no pillars at first. Then the development of Shikara started at the temple of Diogar in Madhya Pradesh. The temple constructed in 8th century had smaller shrines, and the Shikara became the crowning feature of those temples. Then later on, the addition of Mandapa, that is pillared hall, to the temple started during this period itself. The other distinct character of this period was the rectangular wall around the temple and addition of subsidiary shrines at each corners. Here in Nagara style of architecture, shikaras can be of three types. That is, first one is Rekha Prasad Shikara, which is the simple and the most common type of shikara, which is square at base and the walls curve inward to a point on the top. The top is called Latina or Rekha Prasad type of shikara. And next is Vamsana Shikara. They tend to have broader base and shorter in height than Latina buildings. Their roofs are composed of several slabs, as we can see here, that gently rise to a single point over the center of the building. They slope upwards on a straight incline. Vamsana roofs do not curve inwards as in Rekha Prasad Shikara. In many North Indian temples, Vamsana was used for mandapa. Next is Vallabi. That is a rectangular building with a roof that rises into a vaulted chamber. The edge of the vaulted chamber is round like bamboo or wooden wagons that would have been drawn by bullocks in ancient times. The form of this temple is influenced by ancient building forms that were already in existence. They were usually known as wagon vaulted buildings. Next, the second architecture style of Indian temple, that is Dravidian style, which is very common in South India. That is, temple development in South Indian started during Chalukya dynasty during 7th century. These temples were inspired from Buddhist architecture actually. The temples evolved from simple rocket shrine to large and complicated structure. The temples in this period were large square building with a projecting porch and decorative pillars. The roof of the temple had small structure with later emerged as shikara. The entire temple is very simple with minimal decoration. Some examples are Ladkan temple, Durga temple at Elpur. Next is as we say, like the rocket structures developed during 7th-9th century under the rule of Pallava. This was the starting of Dravidian style. The Pallava rulers lead the way of Dravidian style of temple architecture and they built the temples at Mahabalipuram. Next is the Pandya rule, and through which lofty gopurams or gateways at the entrance was evolved. Next, during 11th century, during Chola rule, built one of the tallest temple at that time, that is Brihadeshwara temple at Tanjavur. And here, like later on, the temples extended and became more intricate. Next, in Dravidian style, the majority of the existing buildings are located in southern Indian states of Tamil Nadu, Andhra Pradesh, Kerala and Karnataka. Unlike Nagara's style of architecture, the Dravidian style of temple architecture is enclosed within a compound wall. There is only one Vimana in Dravidian architecture on top of the main temple. Common characteristics of Dravidian style is pyramidal elevation of the tower, and it consists of multiplication of story after story, slightly reduced than one below, ending in a domical member, which is also called as stupi or stupika, that is shikara. Here, Pallavas were instrumental in transition from rocket architecture to South Indian stone temples in Dravidian style. The earliest example of Pallava construction are rocket temples dating from 610 to 690 century and structural temples between 690 to 900 century. The greatest accomplishment of Pallava architecture are rocket temples at Mahabalipuram, which we'll be discussing in the second part of the discussion later. So these are the main elements of Dravidian style of architecture, that is Mandapa, Garbhagriha and the whole Vimana. And here in Dravidian style of temples, the square or inner sanctum is set within a large covered enclosure and external walls were plasters. Dravidian temples have boundary walls, and in later periods stories and vimanas become more and more compressed and pillared halls and corridors and the immense gopurams were added. The entrance of the Garbhagriha had sculptures of Dwarapalakas, Yakshas, etc. The presence of a water tank inside the temple enclosure was a unique feature of Dravidian style of temple architecture. And here, the front wall had a high entrance gateway which is known as Gopuram, and then Vimana, Mantapa, Antarala, etc., as we already discussed in the general temple architecture elements. The temple premise was laid out in Panchayatna style with a principal temple and 4 subsidiary shrines. These are the general examples of Dravidian style of Indian temple architecture, that is Brihadeshwara temple at Tanjavur in Tamil Nadu, Mahabalipuram temple in Tamil Nadu. So now if we summarize the difference between the Nagara and Dravidian style, we can say in Nagara style the plan is square with a number of gradual projection in the middle of each side which imparts it a cruciform shape. In Dravidian style, in the plan, the temple represents a square chamber as a sanctum cell within the square enclosure serving as pradakshina. Nagara style, there is no compound wall, whereas in Dravidian style, there is a compound wall or an enclosure. And in terms of size, Dravidian temples are much larger in comparison to Nagara style. And there is more than one shikara in these temples in Nagara, whereas in Dravidian, this temple has only one shikara. Nagara style, the central tower of this temple has a curvilinear shape, whereas in Dravidian style, it is of a pyramidal shape. Nagara style, the most prominent element or part of this temple is the shikara, and in Dravidian style, it is the entrance gateway or gopura. In Nagara style of architecture, Ganga and Yamuna rivers are crafted or depicted in a personified form. This is located at the entrance of the sanctum. In Dravidian style of architecture, entrance of the temple are built in such a way that they had dwarapalakas on either end. Next, the third style of Indian temple architecture, that is the last part of this session, that is Vyasa style. It is the fusion of above two styles of temple architecture. This style of temple architecture have become more popular after mid 17th century at the time of Chalukya. In this style, presence of pillars are the more prominent, but gopurams are absent. This style is famous in Karnataka or the Deccan part of India. Deccan region where a hybridized style is present, which contain both the elements from Nagara and Dravidian architecture style and is known in some ancient texts as the Vyasa style. One example is Ledkan temple at Ekol in Karnataka. So this is the end of this session, and in the coming session we'll be discussing in detail regarding the Indian temples under various dynasties, that is Gupta period, Pallava, Chola, Pandya, Hoysala and Vijayanagara. Thank you.